A brutal attack was carried out in Uganda this week by a group affiliated with the Islamic State. The Allied Democratic Forces, and more on them in a second, are reportedly behind an attack on a secondary school that resulted in the deaths of 42 teachers and students and the abduction of 6 more. Major General Olum of the Uganda People's Defense Force stated that the ADF carried out the attack to ease the pressure they're feeling from his troops and to show that they're still capable of carrying out large-scale attacks. According to survivors, the ADF opened fire as they approached the school, sending the children and teachers into buildings to try to seek shelter. The attackers then entered the boys' dormitory and opened fire before setting fire to the building, which in turn led to many of the bodies that were eventually recovered being burnt beyond recognition. And while the fires blazed, the ADF terrorists entered the girls' dormitory, drugged them outside, and killed them with machetes and hammers. A sliver of good news amidst this tragedy is that as of today, June 23rd, it sounds like 3 of the 6 abducted children have been rescued by Uganda's military forces. The Allied Democratic Forces have been around since the 1990s and have used unrest in the region to really establish control over some of the economic corridors in western Uganda along their border with the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Then in 2019, after a splintering in the group, one of the leaders pledged his loyalties to the Islamic State. This was confirmed when, in April of 2019, Islamic State media took credit for an ADF attack, referring to it as its Central African province. There are up to 8 different Islamic State affiliates operating inside of Africa right now. The Central African province, though not getting a lot of international attention, has been incredibly active, with 153 attacks resulting in 818 killed and wounded over the last 12 months. By comparison, the Islamic State Khorasan province, the affiliate out of Afghanistan, carried out 104 attacks, causing 669 casualties in that same period of time. Now shifting over to Afghanistan, a recent UN report from the Sanctions Monitoring Team called out that al-Qaeda had reestablished training camps across Afghanistan and now have members serving inside of the Taliban government. Both of these are kind of surprising. I mean, the 2 groups have a shared past, but there was some hope that the Taliban would pursue a different path this time around and not allow externally focused terrorist organizations to call their country home. These 2 groups are far from perfectly aligned, and al-Qaeda has caused a lot of headaches for the Taliban in the past. I mean, before the 9/11 attacks, Mullah Omar, the then leader of the Taliban, was under pressure to rid his country of these Arab fighters because they were bringing a lot of unwanted attention. This played out then when U.S. and NATO forces entered the country, toppled the Taliban government, and then fought a 20-year war. I mean, I think it's fair to say that if al-Qaeda hadn't based themselves out of Afghanistan, the Taliban right now could be coming up on the 30-year anniversary of their rule. So back to the report. It identified al-Qaeda training camps in Helmand, Zabul, Nangarhar, Nuristan, and Baghdad provinces, as well as known safe houses in Farah, Helmand, Herat, and Kabul. Overall, the report cited an estimated 400 al-Qaeda fighters between these camps and another 50 or so leaders that have moved into some of Afghanistan's major cities. Of course, the trend of al-Qaeda leaders moving back into Afghanistan was clear pretty quickly, as the then leader of the organization, Ayman al-Zawahiri, was killed in a drone strike as he stepped outside of his safe house in Kabul back in July of 22. Very early in the Afghanistan war, al-Qaeda was really on the run. Disrupted is probably the best way to put it, but never actually destroyed. And while there was likely al-Qaeda safe houses and members scattered all across Afghanistan during the war, the overt training camps weren't really on the table. I mean, those big stationary targets in a country under constant U.S. air power just wasn't a smart move. So the presence of those now suggests that al-Qaeda views Afghanistan as a permissive operating environment where they have little to no concern of airstrikes on these new compounds. The report also called out that al-Qaeda members are now serving inside of the Taliban government. I'll give some details on a few of them here, but to me it sounds more like al-Qaeda affiliated rather than outright al-Qaeda members. A term they use quite a bit is dual-hatted, where it's kind of hard to tell where the Taliban side of some of these folks end and al-Qaeda begins. They called out a handful of these senior leaders by name. Karib Baryal, who is currently serving as the Taliban governor of Kapisa province, is a pretty complicated figure. Over the last decade or so, he served as the Taliban's Northern Zone commander, and it was believed that he was on the payroll of Iran's Quds Force, who helped them plan and facilitate certain attacks against U.S. and NATO forces. He was also a key figure in the Kabul Action Network, an organization of multiple jihadi groups that carried out attacks in and around Kabul. According to a declassified report from 2012, it's believed that Baryal lived for a period of time in Tehran, where he served as a financial liaison between Iran and the Taliban, where funds were sent into Afghanistan to help carry out attacks against U.S. forces. Reports from NATO's command in Afghanistan, the International Security Assistance Force, stated that Baryal maintained close ties to Afghanistan throughout the war, which kind of appears to be the source of his being labeled as an al-Qaeda figure today. Second is Hafiz Muhammad Agha Hakim, who currently serves as the governor of Panjshir province. Hakim helped form the Badri 313 Brigade, essentially the Taliban Special Forces, who are believed to have received training and funding from the Haqqani Network. The Haqqani Network has historically had pretty close ties with both the Taliban and al-Qaeda. Additionally, Hakim was previously a key associate of Qari Zakir, Haqqani's chief of suicide operations, before Zakir was killed alongside Hamza bin Laden in a drone strike in 2019. Last one here they call out by name is Taj Mir Jawad, who's the Taliban's deputy director of the General Directorate of Intelligence. Jawad worked for the Taliban intelligence arm before the 2001 invasion and then transitioned into a key role throughout the insurgency. Alongside Hakim, he helped stand up the Kabul Action Network and oversaw the Al-Hamza Martyrdom Brigade, an offshoot from the Taliban, directly funded and outfitted by the Haqqani Network. In that role, he oversaw training and deployment of suicide bombers from 2018 until 2021. Notably, it sounds like Jawad was captured by U.S. and Afghan forces in Paktia in 2013, but it's not clear why or when he was released from custody. So each of these groups, al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and Islamic State, are still in the news, and sometimes I think they get a little mixed up. But overall, these are three distinct groups with different goals and different ideas on how to accomplish those goals. Starting with the Taliban, this group is focused on the establishment and governance of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. So really, when compared to the other two, they're very locally focused. They do have a branch in Pakistan, but for the most part, the main Taliban focus is internal to Afghanistan itself. The threat that the Taliban pose to the international community historically, and rising up now again, is not that they'll conduct attacks outside of their country, it's that they allow groups the freedom to operate inside of their country who do want to carry out those attacks. Al-Qaeda was and still is pretty globally focused. Their overarching aim is the overthrow of apostate regimes around the world, of which the United States is front and center. Al-Qaeda did have a short stint where they tried their hand at local governance, but didn't end well. This was back in the 2006 timeframe when al-Qaeda in Iraq was under the leadership of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. AQI became a pretty strong presence in certain areas of Iraq and was able to start implementing their own distinct rule of law, but it wasn't exactly a permissive environment. It turned this shadowy, dispersed network into a pretty easily identifiable target for U.S. and coalition partners, and over a few years, AQI suffered pretty heavy losses, including the death of Zarqawi himself. There was also a bit of a rift emerging here between al-Qaeda Central and AQI, who would eventually transform into the Islamic State. Think of al-Qaeda as being big picture focused, all actions moving towards the goal of toppling apostate regimes around the world. That's the priority and the number one focus. AQI took a different stance, and while constantly engaged with U.S. and coalition forces, also waged a pretty brutal campaign of violence against Shiite Muslims. Now, bin Laden and Zawahiri, the two at the top of al-Qaeda at the time, took issue with this, thinking that it was creating a divide in what could be a broader Muslim coalition against the West. Today, Islamic State is more focused on the control of territory and the implementation right now of Sharia law. They've done this by establishing provinces or affiliates around the world and have carried with them some of that original al-Qaeda in Iraq mentality. Across these affiliates, they have a mix between influence and outright control and are regularly carrying out pretty brutal attacks against Muslims and non-Muslims alike. And this carries over into their relationship with the Taliban in Afghanistan. Overall, Islamic State views the Taliban as too nationalistic and not devout enough. In turn, an open war kicked off between the two in 2015 that's still raging today. Islamic State, Khorasan province, also known as ISK or ISKP, changed their tactics just a little bit right before the Taliban took over. For the first few years, they were attacking Afghan and coalition forces as well as Taliban elements anywhere near their strongholds in some of the eastern portions of the country. But they ran into some of the same issues that al-Qaeda in Iraq had 15 years prior. That's a tough fight when the U.S. has air power overhead 24/7. They took a lot of losses. So recently, Islamic State Khorasan province has transferred to more of an insurgency model focused on key Taliban centers of power. So what we're seeing right now is a lot of targeted assassinations of Taliban leaders and attacks on foreign entities inside of Kabul. From this, it appears the overall Islamic State goal in Afghanistan today is to delegitimize the Taliban on both the domestic and international stage, which may provide an opening for them to once again take and hold territory. But that's all I got for now. Be sure to check out the national security sit-reps I put out on Substack. The link is in the description if interested. But thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.